Today I wanted to share something a little bit different with you than the normal kinds of videos that I make, which is actually wanted to read something that I had published in a book while I was in college. This is my college's annual publication. So that was about a little over 10 years ago. A couple weeks ago, I started producing a weekly podcast called The Enthusiasm Project. And as much as this sounds like a plug for the podcast, I promise it's not. You're welcome to go listen to it or not. Last week, I talked a lot about time. And this week, I wanted to share something that I had written when I was 21 years old, which was really about time and sort of the direction that I think that life should go into and the values behind all of that, which really were the foundation for why I wanted to start this YouTube channel in the first place. And as much as I love to talk about camera gear and tech and all those kinds of things, there's really a greater reason why I'm interested in those things and why I even think it's valuable to share those things. And so today, while I was recording my podcast episode, I just set up the camera to have it record, and then I'll put that here so you can watch it or listen to it, whatever you'd like. And I think, hopefully it's valuable. I think you'll be able to get something valuable out of it. It's something that I felt was really important to share because part of my personal goals for 2019 are to explore more ideas than things, because I'm a really techie person. I love gadgets and the little recorder that I do my podcast with and the mic that's right here and headphones, and I just love learning how to use things and tools and combining things, and I'm really excited about that stuff, if you didn't know. But what I don't want is to just advocate for mindless, material goods as you need this thing to be the best, or this thing is better than that thing, or you're not a real blank until you get blank. I don't want that. I just like talking about the tools that I use. But part of what I want to do in 2019 is to go beyond that a little bit and explore more of the ideas behind why I even think it's important to share that stuff. So what I hope to do is share those things with you in a way that's maybe motivating or interesting, or at the very least sparks a conversation or sparks an idea that will then help the two of us connect, at least ideologically. And the ultimate goal is to have a positive impact on the world, but also to use the time that we have. And that really is kind of the thesis behind the idea of the Enthusiasm Project in the first place, is that life is short and time is limited. And the reason I'm excited about all the stuff that I always talk about on this channel is because there's so much to be excited about and so much to be interested in. I hope that you take something positive and something valuable away from it. I would definitely love to hear your thoughts, since it's a little bit different. And I guess we'll just kind of cut straight into the Enthusiasm Project podcast. I honestly have no idea how to transition to a podcast, so there. Hello and welcome to the Enthusiasm Project. My name is Tom, and this is the podcast where I'm figuring out what this podcast is. This is the third episode of the companion podcast to my YouTube channel, which is also called The Enthusiasm Project. And the real purpose behind it is I wanted to be able to explore some of the topics and ideas that I talk about on the YouTube channel, or even that I don't, but that I think are important and will hopefully be relatable and beneficial to you, or applicable to your own life. And sort of my main thing is exploring the idea that there's just so much in the world to be excited about and to be enthusiastic about, and that it's important to embrace that and to take advantage of that. And so that's our goal here, at least, as we're getting started. What I wanted to do today was add a bit of follow-up to the episode from last week, which was called Life is Short and Time is Limited. And basically, last week, if you didn't hear it or you don't remember, I compared your time to money in a bank account, and kind of used the analogy that a lot of us are really specific with how we spend our money, and thoughtful and intentional. We don't just sort of throw it away freely, but we work hard for it, we earn it, we have a limited amount of it, and we spend it accordingly. But we don't do that with our time. And our time, we find ourselves so easily just sort of wasting our time and using our time in ways that might not be the most productive. And so what I compared it to was that the time you have in your life is kind of like a bank account, where You don't know the balance of this bank account. You can only make withdrawals from the bank account. You can never make deposits, and that's it. And if you had a real bank account that worked that way, you'd be so different with how you viewed your money and how you paid your bills and what you decided to spend that resource on. But that is how our time works, and that is how our lives work. We don't know how much time that we have, and it seems pretty universal that whether it's, a few decades or a century, people seem to agree that it's not enough. Everybody kind of wants more when they're at the end of their time. And knowing that, the fact that we spend so much of our time doing things that maybe aren't the best use of that resource is kind of a huge tragedy, in my opinion. And, there's things that we have to do that we have no choice of. Sometimes you just have to do parts of your job that you don't like, or you have to do errands or chores, or just the thing to keep your life going so it doesn't just fall into a pile of terrible despair and awfulness. But I think that a lot of us are in more control of our time, or could be, than we realize it, and we're just not taking advantage of that. And I also think that there are a lot of people in the world who are not, because they're in such a position where all of their time is genuinely spent on survival and just trying to get by and trying to get from one day to the next day. And they can't really think about things like personal fulfillment and bigger goals and stuff like that, because they need food and shelter and clothing. And I feel that if you're not in that position and you have the ability to be a little more picky or intentional with your time, that it's basically an obligation that you do that, because you've been given this really privileged position to use this very, very valuable, very finite resource. And that is something that I feel really passionately about. And that was one of the main things that led me to create the YouTube channel, The Enthusiasm Project, which, to be 100% honest, I really like. Having that channel has just been one of the most creatively fulfilling things that I've ever done. But at the same time, I don't know that I've 100% hit the mark in the way that I intended, because my intention with it was to show so many things, just to show all the different things that there are to be excited about and interested in. And I'm sort of focusing that through my lens of the things I'm interested in, which is a lot of tech and digital media and that kind of stuff, but in a way that would be applicable to anyone else who's watching, where, at least even if they're not interested in that subject, I can present it in an interesting way, or it can spark an idea in somebody. But I don't know that I've explicitly just said that enough. And I know that, as a teacher, when I'm in class and I'm trying to present a new idea to my students, one of the key things they'll tell you in any teacher credentialing, teacher training program is you have to tell repeatedly what the goal is of the lesson. So, the start of class, you're like, okay, today we're going to blank. And then several times throughout the class, you remind them well, remember, in order to blank, we need to then do this. And then at the end, you're like, okay, cool, now we should all be able to blank. And it seems repetitive, but it really does frame and contextualize everything in a specific way. And so I want to make sure that I am more clear and specific in doing that. And doing this podcast already, in just the few episodes that I've done, has been such a huge source of clarity and reflection for that. So I am real happy about that. But to kind of take it back to what I wanted to share today, which dovetails from last week's episode, is something that I wrote. This is a book. I'm holding a book, if you can hear it. I'm also trying a thing where I'm filming this week's episode just to see what that looks like. So some of you might be able to see the book. But this is a little book. It's a publication from my college. This was actually for my graduation year in 2009, but it was something that I wrote in 2007. I was an English major, and I was fortunate enough to have a lot of really great classmates in my cohort of English majors. And I also had some really, really incredible English professors that they just took the time to be really exceptionally thoughtful and push us in very specific ways. They did not push our whole cohort group of people to do things the same way. They pushed us. They really had a talent for finding our individual aptitudes and pushing us in those directions. It was one of my English professors. It was getting close to the end-ish of my senior year, and he was like, "Oh, are you going to go to the master's program?" And my first thought was, "No, of course not. Why would I? Like, that's not for me. Other people get graduate degrees. Like, I'm barely going to graduate college." And he was like, "You should go. I think like you would benefit from the program would benefit from you." And that there was nothing revolutionary in what he said. He just said you should keep going to school because you're good at school. But in my mind, no one had ever said like, "Yeah, why don't you just go do that other thing?" I'd always viewed that as being something for other people. And so when he took the time to do that, it just sort of shifted everything. And that was huge, because it wasn't just about going into another school program. It was about like, what else in the world is there that I've always viewed as being for other people that could actually also be for me if I just tried. And I think a lot of us do that. We have an I can't mentality when really the only reason you can't is because you won't. And so anyway, every year the college would do this publication called Sketchbook, where it was mostly the English department. I think it was open to everybody. It was mostly the English department, though, because, the writers you could do original literature, you could do poems, you could do photographs and artwork and all kinds of stuff. And for my senior year, I published an essay that I had written earlier, a couple years before. And I meant to look this up, but I kind of forgot to, actually. In one of my English classes, we read an essay. I can't remember the guy's name. I keep thinking it's Malcolm Gladwell, but it's absolutely not, because it was a guy named Malcolm, but he was in his 80s, so it definitely wasn't Malcolm Gladwell. But this guy who wrote the article, it was called A View from 81. And he was at like in his 80s, in the later part of his life, and he was looking back. He'd made this comparison as if he had climbed a mountain, and he was looking back down on the journey up the mountain. And while he was in the midst of the journey, he couldn't really see where he was. But now, hindsight is 2020. So looking back, he could see how everything was connected and how one thing led to another. And maybe there was an easier route here or a more difficult route here, but how the route he took led him to where he was. And I read that. He was 81 when he wrote that. And I read that when I was 21. And so I felt kind of the exact opposite. I really loved the essay because it had a lot of self-deprecation in it. It was really funny. It was really insightful. But at the same time, I was he sort of has this tone in the essay where he's like sort of sitting back and grandiosely reflecting on his life. It's kind of like the Robert Frost poem, A Tale of Two, the Two Roads poem. I forget what the actual title is. I don't think it's what most people call it. But, two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled. That made all the difference. If you really read the poem, the way that the author describes the roads, they're exactly the same. Like he talks about the one less traveled, but really, if you look at the imagery in the poem, a lot of the way he describes those roads is they are very, very similar. And so it's not necessarily that he took the road less traveled. It's sort of making a decision to take a road. And then the way that you could kind of interpret the poem is at the end, the way he's talking about, I took the road less traveled, it made all the difference. He's kind of like a pompous ass in a way, because he's like patting himself on the back and congratulating himself on doing something that everybody picks a path. And he's just sort of like, it's, I caught a fish this big kind of a thing, where he's reflecting and exaggerating a little bit. So if you really dig into that poem, it kind of has a different meaning than the one that is often attributed to it. It's brilliant either way, however you look at it, and I still love it, but it's kind of funny. But that was kind of the feeling I had about The View from 81, where this guy was looking back on his life, and he just sort of had that confidence that comes with having finished the journey, where he could see how everything was done. When someone significantly older than you tells you like, oh yeah, one day you'll do this, and oh no, you'll do this, this will happen, and you're not at that point yet, and they might be trying to help you, but it can feel really condescending in a way. So I wanted to write a response to that. And it was funny because in the class, it was one, like, I think it was some kind of original writing course or creative writing course. And one of the major projects was to do an original piece of writing based on your true life. And it was like this thing where every quarter, every semester, when that project rolled around, people would come to class with like Kleenex and tissue everywhere, because everyone was just sharing the most tragic and, very well written, very well told, but it was just like, oh my gosh, like the biggest group therapy session in the world. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to kind of take a different approach. So I looked at The View from 81. I was 21 at the time. And it was, I think we ended up reading it like on my 21st birthday. Or no, I don't know. Yeah, it was almost my 22nd birthday. That's what it was. It was the last day of being 21 that I read the essay in class. And I really liked it. And I took a different tone than what people typically did. But it was sort of a response to that original essay of The View from 81, looking back over your life instead of being young and looking, standing at the foot of the mountain and kind of preparing to make the climb. And the big thing there was, I've only read this once, I think, in like the last 8 years. And it was a year and a half ago. Heather and I read it on a live stream because we found the book and I just sort of went through it. And I still really actually love it and I'm really proud of it. But it definitely does have elements of, here's a 21-year-old English major trying to be a clever English major. But the main point, though, is it really was kind of the framework and the blueprint for my idea that I didn't want to end up 81 years old or at any later point in my life looking back and, realizing that an opportunity had disappeared, that I had not done a thing I wanted to do. And I talked about that last week. There's a drum set sitting right behind me right now, which, I wanted a drum set since I was 10, but I didn't get it till I was 30. And I almost waited until I was 35 or 40 to get it. So that what I realized when I turned 30 and bought my drum set was, if I don't do it now, there's going to be a time. It's a really physical instrument. It's not something you can play forever. If you get injured or sick or whatever, you can't do it anymore. And there will literally be a time where it's just not possible to do it, and you'll never get the chance to have done it. And I realized I'd wasted like 20 years with this dream of just playing the drums, which is a pretty simple dream. And I just kept putting it off, and eventually it was going to become impossible, and I didn't want that to happen. So there's a lot of things like that, and that kind of mentality of time was something that I wanted to explore and kind of like actually put to paper in this essay. So my main point for today's podcast is to just read the essay to you and to myself again and just sort of see how it feels. So I'm 33 now. I was 21 when I wrote this. Using math, that is, I wrote this when I was younger. But I believe that a lot of it still lines up. And then just like with the discussion last week about time, I don't want to just explore these topics for myself, but I want you to understand where I'm coming from when we talk about these things. And most importantly, I hope that it's something that's relatable and something that is kind of connecting and possibly motivating. And, yeah, I mean, that's it. What more could you ask for, right? So here we go. The View from 20-something. This is like I'm reading my first audiobook. Sorry. The View from 20-something by Thomas Buck. So they say life is a journey. Now, I'm not as adept at metaphors as Dr. House, MD, but I guess it's true. After all, life has a beginning, middle, and end, and most journeys have these things too, unless something has gone horribly, horribly awry. After living for more than 2 decades, maybe I'm past the beginning of my journey, but not by much. If you want to get real technical, I guess we could say maybe I'm 15 minutes or so down the trail, or I'm walking out of the sporting goods store with a shiny new backpack and a fresh pair of Birkenstocks, except that I don't wear Birkenstocks because they're tacky and it's 2007. Come on, get with the times. I think these metaphors are getting awfully hazy right about now, so it's probably time to move on. I guess it's safe to say that everything so far in my life has been leading up to this point in time. Of course, this is an argument that could be made for any given point in a person's life, but if you'll be so kind as to politely suspend your disbelief for a moment, I'd like to suggest that it's especially true for people in their early 20s, and I'm not just making this argument to indulge my raging narcissism. We've spent our whole lives preparing for adulthood, and now it's finally here. As children, how many times were we all asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? As teenagers, we were constantly bombarded with, where do you want to go to school? What are your career plans? The beauty and the flaw with these questions is that we're allowed to answer them without consequence. Our answer can change each time we're asked the question, and it makes no difference. If I had to commit to what I wanted to be when I grew up at 8 years old, I'd be a bus driver astronaut right now. Unfortunately, however, things have begun to change. Decisions about the direction in which we want our lives to go aren't just fanciful daydreams anymore. They're the foundation for actual plans. The past 7,300 to 9,000 or so days of our lives have been preparing us to be where we are right now, embarking on the journey, and it's terrifying. Growing up, I always had a vision in my mind of the person I wanted to become as an adult. I wanted to be confident, smart, successful, loving, kind, and ambitious. I wanted to be someone who had a positive impact on the world in some way. As a quiet, shy, slightly overweight, and easily unnoticeable child, with many interests but no clear direction, skills, or ambitions, this future self seemed a far cry from who I felt I was. I didn't worry though. I had years before I'd be grown up. Surely that would be plenty of time for some miraculous caterpillar to butterfly-like transformation to take place. Not that I particularly cared to be a butterfly, but you get the picture. The thing is, here I am, quote-unquote, grown up. Yet I feel pretty much the same as that insecure 12-year-old. Although I do have a driver's license now, plus I can see R-rated movies and buy cigars, and that's pretty neat, except that I don't smoke. But that's not the point. The real point is, I am scared. I'm scared of the future, scared of letting go, scared of making the wrong decisions. I'm scared of settling for less than what I dream of, and I'm scared of wasting the time that I have. And it's those last two that are the big ones for me. I don't want to look down the road of my life and feel like I didn't do what I could have, fully aware that by that point it's too late. You can only go forward and never back. So, how can we be sure that we're not wasting our time? I ask this question a lot, but I don't know the answer. It reminds me of something I found after my grandmother died and I was going through her things. I came across a little bundle of clippings from various newspapers and magazines, the kind that are only kept by grandmas for some reason that no one really knows, but we all just accept. It turned out to be a collection of various musings written by various authors. And I can only remember one of them, and it was a bit cheesy and perhaps a tad mushy, but I've never been able to forget it. It was a short story about two girls sitting by a pond watching some ducks. After a while, one of the girls stood up to leave and said to the other, "Come on, let's go, quit wasting time." The other girl just looked at her and said, "I'm not wasting time, I'm watching the ducks." Now, I have no way of knowing for sure, but I'm almost positive it would be a very awful feeling to reach the end of the journey and realize that I never took time to watch the ducks along the way. But how much duck watching should there be? Should we all have a specific monthly budget for duck watching or some type of duck watching calculator? No, we shouldn't. At least I don't think we should. Although I could be wrong, and if that's the case, I apologize for everything beyond this point. I think that instead of allotting specific time to watch the ducks, the key is to constantly be duck watching. So how do you go about doing this? As tempting as it may be to take a trip to the local pond, it's not necessary. That's not where you'll find the answer. And as cliche and graduation speech-esque as it may sound, I believe the answer lies in our dreams. Not the ones that come during sleep and can be quite awesome, but the ones that come during your waking hours and are even more awesome. The ones that make the jump from dream to reality if given the chance. We can't be afraid to chase our dreams. And that sounds simple enough, right? But for me, and I'm guessing for most people, it's not. I don't even know exactly what my dreams are, let alone what I should do to follow them. But I think that if I just trust myself, I'll find the answer. Somewhere deep inside, we already know the answers to all these questions. The hard part is listening. There have already been far too many instances in my life where I felt that sinking feeling There have already been far too many instances in my life where I felt that sinking feeling from deep inside that comes with making a wrong decision or doing something that isn't true to myself. The feeling that something inside is screaming out as loud as it can in protest, but its cries are falling on deaf ears. I hate that feeling. I don't dislike, despise, loathe, or lament it. I hate it. It's the feeling that I'm failing at life, that I'm not listening to myself. I want to do everything in my power to avoid that feeling. If we spend our whole lives putting our dreams on the proverbial shelf, I have no doubt that our journeys will consist of nothing except this foul feeling. So we have to follow our dreams. It's obligatory. And why not? Think about it. This time is all there is, and there's not very much of it. Once it's gone forever. So how can we afford not to follow our dreams? Now that I've made such a big stink about following dreams, it is worth noting that even though the idea of chasing after dreams might sound great on paper, believe it or not, It's actually a very difficult thing to do. Dreams won't always pay the bills, and I don't personally know anyone who enjoys the pain of hunger or longs to live in a van down by the river. So maybe it's naive to think that all of life should be spent chasing dreams. And if that's the case, fine, I can accept that. But I still say that we can never allow ourselves to forget our dreams altogether. To forget dreams is to fall victim to the enemy of all dreams, mediocrity. All of the uncertainty and anxiety about the future ultimately boils down to mediocrity and the compromise that must be made in deciding how much of it to allow in life. What is mediocrity? Mediocrity is settling. It's taking the safe way or the easy way, which is seldom the way of the heart. It sneaks up on you and allows you to bury yourself in it. Mediocrity is easy. It starts by tricking you into sacrificing a little tiny part of a dream, and then another part, and then another after that. And eventually, your entire existence turns into the exact opposite of what you dreamt. Dreams are the key to avoiding mediocrity. It takes courage to follow a dream, to venture off the well-worn path. But I know it just has to be worth it. I don't know how I know, I just know. We all know. The ability to dream is fundamentally human. If we ignore our dreams, we ignore who we are. If we can find the courage within ourselves to follow our dreams, then not only will we reach the destination of our journeys, but we'll be content with the road we took to get there. And I understand that I'm not guaranteed a long life. In fact, no matter how long my life is, it won't be long enough. But that doesn't matter. We don't need to be a century old to reap the rewards of our journeys. As long as we have the courage to follow our hearts, we're already there. As nice as it would be to achieve our dreams, it's the act of striving for them that makes all the difference. It's one thing to fail, but it's another to never try. And that's all I have to say about that. So, there we go. Wrap that up with a nice Forrest Gump quote. And I like coming back to that. So I hope that hearing that, I hope that was enjoyable or interesting or motivating or something. I hope that it was emotionally positive for you to hear that. And I know for me to read it, I'm the one that wrote it, so it's kind of like you're going back to this thing that you told yourself in the past. And of course, you can't help but see how your current self stacks up to that. But I mean, if anything, I would almost encourage everyone to write something like that, some idea of what your values are and what you would want to look back on and reflect and not regret in your life throughout your journey, because that key part of once it's done, and there's nothing you can do about that is really scary, but it's also really, really motivating. And I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's hard to really communicate that, and I've always felt passionately about that. And I don't know why, and that's what I spent the whole episode last week talking about. So I don't really need to jump straight back into that from scratch again. But what I can say is, especially as a teacher, I see this all the time because obviously a person doesn't know what they don't know. But a lot of my high school students, they're teenagers, so of course they really don't know what they don't know. And I have two students specifically that come to mind who, they're brother and sister, and they're from a very, very, very poor family, and they've had a really challenging upbringing for their entire lives. You know, at points they've been homeless. When they're not homeless, you know, they definitely don't have a lot. They're very grateful for what they have. They're super smart, super talented, but they've really overcome like just a ton of struggle for their whole lives. And it's kind of been this thing with them that anytime we do anything at school that involves money, they are obviously given a waiver. So if we say like, hey, there's this thing coming up, it costs $100, there's a registration fee of $20 for this other thing, like whatever it is, we'll always find a way to get them a waiver just because it would be the barrier that would stop them from entering. There's not an extra $100 to go around for something. But that, you know, they've been my students for several years now, and one of them is about to graduate this year. The other one is a year behind. And what I've noticed is I actually need to find a way to address this, because that's still happening, where it's, if something costs money or if something is far away, they say, oh, we can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. And what we need to kind of go over, I'm using them as a specific example, but I think it highlights something that applies to all of us, which is when they were 11 or 12 or 13 or whatever, I can't was true, because what can you do? Something costs $100. You don't have $100. There's no way your family can spare $100. Then you're probably right. You can't. But when you're 17, when you're 18, maybe you can. Maybe you can get a job. Maybe you can use your skills and take on a client, especially, being in a digital media program, you're equipped with a ton of skills. So there's a lot more can than can't. If something is far away and there's no transportation there, the bus isn't fun, but, it takes a long time, but it will get you there. And one of my friends who's also a teacher at our school said this thing to his students that I stole and say to mine all the time. And I even say it to myself all the time, which is sometimes if you're doing something for students and you say like, hey, make sure to be here at, 6 a.m. on Saturday because we have this event to go to. That is like, an impossible feat to get teenagers to be somewhere, bright and early on a Saturday morning that's voluntary. And then, sometimes students don't show up. But he was asking his kids like, okay, if I told you that I'll give you $1 million to be here at 6 a.m. on Saturday, would you be here? And unanimously, they were like, yes, we would be there for sure. So then it's not a matter of can or can't. It's a matter of motivation and value. And I do that to myself all the time. When there's something that I don't think I can do or something that I feel is holding me back, I kind of ask myself, like, if I got $1 million to do this, would I do it? The answer is usually yes. Like, it might be really hard to get to one location at a certain time or to finish a project on time or to whatever, achieve something. But if you ask yourself, if someone was offering me $1 million, could I get this done? And your answer is yes, then you know right away it's not an issue of possible, it's an issue of motivation. And that doesn't mean just because the answer is yes, that you should do the thing, because it also comes down to your values. So maybe yes, the answer is for sure you could do it, but is that what you want to spend your time on? And of course, it really does highlight things because there's certain stuff, if you told me right now, I'll give you $1 million to go to the moon by 4 p.m., like, well, I'm not going to get $1 million because this is not going to happen. There's certain things that just aren't possible. And so, there are all of these tools. The big thing is to take a moment, step back from the day-to-day grind and from your day-to-day habits and sort of look at things from an objective outside point of view. And for me personally, what has worked really well to do that is to use time as a frame of reference because it's such a limited resource. And that to me is what shifts things into a really clear perspective. For example, it's the start of February right now, but of course the start of every year comes with New Year's resolutions and goals. And I really, I've talked about my YouTube channel multiple times. I love that. It's a really fun thing. And growing that YouTube channel is something that gives me a lot of value and joy. It's something that I just get a lot from doing. And I want to focus on that every year. I want to keep, continuing that journey, especially while it's fun. It really pushes me to do more of stuff that I find valuable. So for me, it's been immensely beneficial. And I want to grow that. And there's different ways you can grow a YouTube channel. You might use, your audience size, your view counts, the number of videos you make, the kinds of videos you make, the topics you would address, whatever. And for me, it's a little bit of everything, but there is, as much as you don't want to get distracted by audience numbers, there is something to be said for audience numbers. And so right now I'm close to 4,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel, and I would love by the end of 2019 to be over 10,000. I don't know why, but in my head, that just seems like, it seems like a big number that's unachievable. And so reaching that it would feel good to achieve something that I thought was not achievable, especially 2 years ago when you start from zero. But at the same time, it also doesn't mean anything. I know two things. One, that it really doesn't have anything to do. It doesn't mean that the videos are going to be better or not as good. So it doesn't actually affect the thing that I'm making and spending my time on. And at the same time, I'm also sure that, by the time you get to 10,000, that's great. But then you're like, what about 20 or 100,000 or 1 million or whatever? And it's kind of this endless cycle that just never stops. And I don't want to fall into that. But anyway, what popped into my head was every once in a while I'll see these videos will pop up in my suggested feed, which are really they're I don't even know how to feel about them actually, but they're people documenting like Simone Getz, who does the channel where she makes crappy robots. I haven't used like profanity really yet on this podcast, and I don't use a lot of profanity really in my own life. So I was like, I don't know. Anyway, she makes crappy robots. But last year she got a brain tumor, and then you kind of documented her whole thing of getting brain surgery, and then just recently announced that the tumor was back and there's going to be a whole different round of treatment. And there's other people who have documented, their whether they had a channel and an audience before or whether they grew one from their experience battling like a disease or an illness or, a struggle of some kind. They grow these massive audiences. And what pops into my head, especially because Simone, like her thing in her last update about her brain tumor was that all she wanted was to be healthy again. And that's it. Like that's all you want. And I know that there is an old, I think I want to say it's a Middle Eastern proverb, but I forget which country it comes from. Maybe Afghanistan, that says the healthy wear a crown that only the sick can see, which is 100% true. And that is worth a whole discussion in and of itself. But my point is that for me right now, going like, oh, having an audience of 10,000 is great. But there's a lot that can happen in your life, your health, your physical well-being, your priorities, whatever, where you could easily achieve a goal like that and have it be entirely meaningless. Because if you have a brain tumor and 1 million subscribers, who really cares? By the end of your journey, like, you're not going to be lying in your deathbed going, oh my gosh, I'm so glad this one video got 7-digit views. Like, what? That's crazy. I was on the trending page. Like, no, you're still going to die. And it's really important to put that stuff into perspective and focus more on the growth and the value and the maybe personal and communal benefits that come from doing those things. I don't know if communal is the right word, but really more the thing, it kind of goes back to, I feel like I'm rambling all over the place, but these are the thoughts and feelings I have after reading the piece that I wrote. It kind of goes back to that idea of, and we hear this a lot as teachers, where your students don't remember what you taught them, but they remember how you made them feel, which kind of goes for every relationship. You might not always remember what somebody said or what somebody did, but you always remember how that person made you feel. And that is something to really focus on when you're thinking about your greater impact. It really doesn't matter what your reach is, what your audience size is, whatever. It's what you're contributing to the world. Is the world better because you were here, or is it not? And that's really what I was going for when I wrote this essay. And I remember specifically one of the main thoughts that I had in the essay was I wrote it at 21, and for some reason in my mind, by the time I was 25, I was going to have like life figured out 100%. I got it. And I don't know why. I just felt like 25-year-olds are grown-ups and they know what's happening in the world. And by the time I'm 25, I would feel that way. And as I was approaching 25, I was 21 and 22, I was kind of realizing, oh, wait, like I'm not going to just magically be financially secure, and I'm not just going to like have a great job, and I'm not going to just be healthy or have a great relationships in my life or whatever. You actually have to make those things happen. So I think a lot of us at any time in our life, but especially when we're young, you can grow up thinking like, oh, well, I'm an adult, this will happen. And I see that with my students all the time. They just sort of assume, yeah, I'll have a house and a car and a job and whatever, but kind of forgetting that you actually won't unless you take active, conscious steps and make an active, conscious effort to make those things happen. And that was really terrifying to realize when you're in college in your early 20s. And I was like, oh, no, I have to really be intentional with my time and energy and pursuits to make sure that I achieve the things I want to achieve. And it wasn't like, this is not self-congratulatory, because there's lots and lots of times where I didn't feel that I was at all living up to that or on that path at all. And there was so many times where I felt that I was settling for mediocrity. And it's exactly like I said in the essay, where you have this big grand idea of how you want something to be, and it's really easy to give up a little bit of that to say, okay, well, here's the grand idea, but maybe this little part of it, maybe I don't really need that. Maybe it's not as important, so I don't need that. Oh, maybe this part over here, this part over here. And then what you're left with is it's nothing really. It's not at all what you originally set out for. And that's really scary because that's so easy. It's like the metaphor of like the frog boiling in the water. Like, they don't know that they're boiling until the water is boiling. And it's kind of that sort of thing. No one is going to jump into a mediocre life, but it's really easy to just one day wake up and find that you've accidentally created a mediocre life for yourself. And that's, I mean, for me, that is really where the YouTube channel fits in, because that was not only the result of me wanting to not have mediocrity and shake off the mediocrity that I thought I was letting into my life, but it was also a way to reach out and not just say that to myself, but to say that and share that and connect that idea with the larger world. And that is where I really think the value came from. So for me, that's why I'm so attached to the idea of a YouTube channel, is because it has been a gauge of reducing mediocrity in my life, and a gauge of how much there is, how much there isn't. And that is the benefit I've gotten. And I'm not trying to make everyone start a YouTube channel, but I am encouraging everyone to really think about the things that are valuable and that you want to strive for. And then what are you doing to get there? So, if I had always wanted to play the drums in my life, and I imagine myself being 35 years old and a great drummer, well, if I'm 30 and I still don't have a drum set, guess what's not going to happen when I'm 35? If you imagine yourself having this wonderful retirement where you can just relax and use your time as you see fit, but you're 28 years old with no savings and massive debt, like, you really need to think, like, how is that actually going to happen? How are these things that you want to happen? They're not unattainable. They're not unachievable. They just need to have a strategy behind them and have a conscious effort put into it. And what I think most of us find is that it's oftentimes not about the end result at all. It's not about, I achieved the thing, I have that number in my savings account, I have that number of subscribers, I have the house or the retirement or whatever. It's really the process of building it and getting there that is often the most rewarding. The fact that you're constantly doing something to better yourself, that you're working towards a goal, that you're not allowing mediocrity to be a part of your life is the most rewarding thing, much more so than just getting the medal at the end of the marathon. Like, the medal is a great reminder, but the fact that you ran the marathon is the accomplishment. So that's probably a good place to wrap up for today. I feel like that was a nice, powerful point there. My original goal was I just wanted to have a documentation of reading this essay because I really like it. So I hope that you enjoyed it as well. And I hope you get something out of this podcast. I think now it is available on every podcast platform. So if you want to share it with someone or tell someone about it, wherever people can get a podcast in the world, it's there. And you're listening to it, so I don't need to tell you listen to it. If you'd like to connect with me on anything, I'm at SoDarnTom on Twitter and Instagram, and of course, YouTube channel, The Enthusiasm Project. The beauty of not having millions and millions of subscribers is it's super easy to see and reply and respond and connect to pretty much all the messages that come through. So it's a nice thing to be able to actually connect and reach out and connect with people. So I really appreciate you spending the valuable resource of your time listening to this podcast. I hope you got something out of it. I hope it was beneficial, and I hope to see or hear or talk at you again next week. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much. And just so this video doesn't seem super out of place, here's a little bit about tech. As I'm figuring out my podcast workflow, I've been recording everything actually with the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus just into the Zoom H4n and then listening on headphones. I'm trying to do very minimal editing with the podcast because I want it to be more long form and I want it to be more like a genuine discussion. So there's very minimal editing in GarageBand, and I'm trying to get a really clear workflow put together so that way it's easy to do more and more of them on top of all the YouTube channels, on top of life in general. So right now it's a super simple setup. I just use the Rode VideoMic Pro into the H4n, listen on headphones, very simple editing in GarageBand, and then I ended up just using Anchor to distribute the podcast, which is actually pretty cool because it just throws it out on every platform and I don't have to think about it. So the workflow is super simple. I know it's 2019. It's legally required for everybody to have a podcast at this point. So if you want to start yours, it's really simple. And all I really advise is to just start it, stop planning it, and just start the thing. Like, just do the thing, right? Just do the thing. Dreams are the key to avoiding mediocrity. It takes courage to follow a dream, to venture off the well-worn path. But